Hello, and welcome to Old Ways in New Jersey. I'm your host, Angus Cress Gillespie. Previously on this show, we've talked about such things as traditional musicians of New Jersey and old houses of New Jersey. But today, we're going to try something different. Our guest today is Stewart Milstein. As a child growing up in Brooklyn, New York, he took up the hobby of stamp collecting. Well, you might say, what's so unique about that? Well, the thing is that within the universe of stamp collecting, as a teenager, Stewart began to specialize. He doesn't just collect stamps, he collects the whole envelope. In particular, he collects envelopes that have been sent from ships. I was intrigued with this hobby, so I asked Stewart, what can we learn from these envelopes about ships named for New Jersey? It turns out you can learn a lot, so it's my pleasure to welcome Stewart to our studio today. Well, Stewart, I've known you a long time. How did you get started in stamp collecting? What was the appeal?
Well, the appeal was a rainy Saturday in Brooklyn in the early 50s. I was getting under my mother's skin. She took me down to the store. She bought a Scott stamp album, 5,000 stamps on paper, and told me to mount them. And I rapidly became, over a period of years, convinced I was never going to finish this job. And so I began to look for something else in the realm of philately, and it turned to covers.
And how come naval covers?
I had a cousin who worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And when there was an open house, his two daughters didn't want to go. I became his son for the day, went on the ships, and then he gave me my first cover ever. And I said, "You can get mail from ships?" And he said, "Yes, you can." And that's where it all began.
And there's an organization, Universal Ship Cancellation Society. We have a poster here. Tell us about that.
It's an organization of people who share an interest in naval philatelic history. Some of our members are former military. Others, like myself, are not. I like it because I'm just interested in history, and I'm interested in ships. And this combines both of them.
Well, you were a teacher for many years, and you were teaching U.S. history. Were you able to combine naval history into regular history?
Yes, I did. I taught American history for almost 37 years, and it's hard to teach history without mentioning the role that the Navy plays in U.S. foreign policy and in protecting the nation. And I would bring covers to school and pass them around the students.
And they would get interested.
I would hope so.
Yeah. And I understand the Navy didn't really introduce postal service until 1908. What did the envelopes kind of look like back then?
In 1908, most of the crew were probably illiterate. And so postcards were used because it had an illustration, and they would write down a couple of words or two. In the case of the people who were more literate, they were using small number 6 size envelopes. Nothing big. It's just too hard.
Yeah. And then along in the 1920s, there's this Lieutenant Commander Francis Losey, and he sort of standardized the postmarks, right?
Yes, he published an article in the American Philatelist in 1929, and he formalized the classification of postmarks. And his system is what most collectors still use today.
Yeah. Every envelope that we're discussing, there's a stamp with a cancellation, a postmark, there's an address, and over on the left-hand side, there's a cachet. But the cachet is eye candy. It decorates the envelope, but it's kind of changed over time. Tell us about the making of the cachets.
Originally, this part of the envelope would be blank, and people would specialize in the cancel. But after a while, people wanted to see what the ship looked like, and so cachets came into being. And they could be typed, printed, rexographed, mimeographed, whatever.
Hand-drawn.
Hand-drawn. And whatever the collector decided to do was based upon the available technology. This is the technology of the 1930s. This is the technology of the 21st century. People have gone to their computers and they computer generate caches and add them to the envelope. Yes, it is eye candy, but it's also an extension in many ways of the postmark because it's telling you something. Where is the ship? What is the ship doing? Why is the ship worthy of notification? What makes this collectible? Nowadays, I would hazard to say that people collect the cachet and place more importance on that than they do on the postmark.
And then we talked about cachet. I want to now switch gears and talk about the naming of ships. And one of the most important ships have always been named for states, and New Jersey is one of the states. So let's look at an example here. USS New Jersey was a battleship number 16.
Number 16. Up until this time, the United States stopped using battleships. It was almost a rule of thumb, with one exception, that all battleships would be named after states.
Yeah.
Which is why at Pearl Harbor, thinking of the battleships as a roll call of the states.
Yeah, and then we move along.
This is interesting. This is Battleship New Jersey, the last of the big gun battleships. She's now a museum down in Camden, but this was the last day she received serviced mail, and the postmark on the top right is an example of the kind of thing that Losi classified. There are so many different varieties.
And interestingly enough, back in the day, the battleship was the most important ship, arguably. But I think arguably today, maybe the submarine is the most important ship.
Yeah.
Here we have a submarine named after the state of New Jersey.
This is the latest in United States Navy nuclear attack submarines. USS New Jersey is supposed to be commissioned in Earl Naval Weapons Station in September.
And so we've talked battleship named after state, submarine after state, but there's also sometimes there were naval warships named after cities. Let's take a look. Here's the Camden. Tell us about this one.
Camden is an underway replenishment ship. She carried oil, she carried ammunition, and she carried supplies which would be transferred to ships at sea. This allowed the fleet to stay at sea and not have to return to port. So this was basically, this is the supermarket.
Yeah, and it's both big and fast.
Yes.
So it's very efficient. Okay, this is named after Camden, but there's another ship named after Camden. This one is a submarine tender, if I have it right.
Originally, this was a German ship that was seized during World War I and was converted into a submarine tender. And then later on, she was used for other things. She was used as a barracks ship when she no longer tended submarines. It was basically a floating hotel where the sailors stayed on board while their ship was either being serviced or while they were waiting for new assignment.
Okay, and then here's one name for Princeton. It's a gunboat from 1898. I understand it was kind of a composite, partly wood and partly steel.
And yes, this ship represents the transition from an all-steam, a sail steam navy to, as you can see, the masts for the sails. But you see a smokestack. So she's taking advantage of both elements of propulsion.
It's in transition.
Yep. She served as in the Philippine Wars. She served in the Spanish-American War, and eventually wound up as the station ship in Samoa. Station ship is basically permanently floated and left in place.
Yeah. And here's one named for the city of Trenton. It's a landing platform dock, kind of used for amphibious warfare, expeditionary warfare.
Yeah, she carries Marines on board, and they could either be placed on shore using helicopters, which is the large empty space at the back. It's a landing platform for helicopters. She also had the ability to put men in smaller ships and bring them to the shore. The interesting thing about Trenton is she evacuated 3,500 Americans from Lebanon in 2006. That's 1,700 plus in each ship.
And here is another Trenton earlier, 1889. It was a steamer. I understand it was wrecked in Samoa by a hurricane.
Yeah, as a teacher of American history, this is one of the fun ships. Captains in that time had much more leeway than captains nowadays because there was no communication directly with the ship. There was a dispute between the United States and Germany over who owned the Samoan Islands, and 3 American warships and 3 German warships wound up in the harbor in Samoa. And as they stood facing each other, a typhoon wrecked all 6 of them.
Wow.
And with the ships wrecked, the government of the United States and the government of Germany decided to end this dispute diplomatically. And so it never came to a show of arms.
Yeah. And speaking of cities, here's one named for the city of Cape May, and it's huge. It's a large ship. It can carry barges, because barges aren't self-propelled. They have to be towed with a tugboat, but this can move them to where they're needed.
This ship is in ready reserve, which means she's stationed somewhere, and she's loaded with supplies. And when the time comes and you need to bring a lot of cargo close to shore, this is the kind of ship. Now, the red, white, and blue stripes on the stack mean that this is a military sea lift command ship. Most of the crewmen on the ship are not naval personnel.
Merchant mariners.
Merchant mariners, yeah. Correct. Okay.
And here is another Trenton. There are lots of Trentons.
Yeah, popular name.
This is a Omaha class. Well, no, what is it? It's a shallow draft ship.
Yep.
It can deliver supplies.
It's catamarans, twin-hulled.
Oh, very interesting.
And the idea here is to bring in supplies and bring them in quickly. And this will do that, and it'll come very, very close to shore. The less time spent in transit from the ship to the shore, the more likely it is the cargo is going to get ashore.
And here's another Trenton. This is a light cruiser.
This Trenton here was very, very lightly armed. She has a low hull number. She's CL-11.
It almost looks like a 4-stack destroyer.
Yeah, it does. And if you notice in the cancel, another thing that Dr. Losey noted was there is a slogan in the cancel saying that this piece of mail was canceled on this date off Apia, Samoa, where the other Trenton was destroyed.
Huh. Okay. Still talking about cities. Here's the USS Newark. It looks like a heavy protected cruiser.
It is. It's the first of the heavy protected cruisers. And she served in 3 significant operations in the Spanish-American War. And she was in the Philippine insurrection. And she eventually served off China in the Boxer Rebellion. It would be a ship like this and the places that she served that I would use basically to show students the Navy as a tool of foreign policy.
Yeah.
Of course, once you got inland and the fighting got away from the shoreline, the value of the ship was kind of limited.
Yeah. And again, it's a combination steamer and sailor.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, here's another named after a city, the USS Princeton. It looks like a light aircraft carrier, and I understand it was launched about 1942, and it was sunk at the Leyte Gulf in 1944, if I'm not mistaken.
She's the only American aircraft carrier sunk directly by a single bomb hit.
Wow.
The Japanese dropped the bomb. It went between the 2 elevators on the flight deck, exploded on the hangar deck, and set off the the torpedoes and the ammunition and the gasoline that was stored, and she burned. And USS Birmingham, a light cruiser, tied up next to her to supply people to fight fires, to supply hose lines. And then Princeton blew up, and all that shrapnel flew across the space and tore into all the men topside on the Birmingham. So it was a double loss. Birmingham didn't sink. Princeton did.
Yeah. This Princeton is a light aircraft carrier. Here's a successor. It's a heavier aircraft carrier, still named Princeton, and I think it was also in World War II.
Very, very late in the war.
Yeah.
Again, you can see here the classification of postmarks. This is a different style of postmarks. And on the left here, you have what naval collectors call a cachet, and that's a design that tells you something about the ship, where it is, what it might be doing. Now, at the end of the war, this ship, as the bigger aircraft carriers were produced, this became an anti-submarine aircraft carrier. It would send out aircraft to detect submarines, and then it was converted into an LPH, a helicopter carrier. So she had a long and interesting life.
Yeah. Now, we're talking about the name Princeton. Here's a sort of up-to-date Princeton. It's a guided missile cruiser.
Yes, Princeton is an Aegis guided missile cruiser, and this was an important port visit. In 1990, she went to Vladivostok in what was then the Soviet Union, and this is a hand-painted cachet. Again, a different type of postmark. But what I find most interesting is that someone went ashore and managed to get Soviet stamps and put them on the envelope. Now, on this envelope, the only stamp that the post office really counts is the U.S. stamp. The Soviet stamp doesn't carry much weight. But it's interesting. And again, a time, a place, an event, and the Navy involved in foreign policy.
Now, so far we've been talking about ships named for the state of New Jersey, named for cities in New Jersey, but at one point we even took up counties. Let's take a look. Here, this is a landing ship tank named after Monmouth County, and it's kind of interesting because there's lots and lots of LSTs, and there's lots and lots of counties, so we'll never run out of names.
Nope. The Navy produced over 1,000 of these in World War II. And the beauty of this ship, they're very, very shallow draft. So they could run very close to the shore, open up the front doors of the ship, extend a ramp, and then wheeled or tracked vehicles can come down. Men can come down. But LST had some interesting connotations to people who served on it during the war. LST stood for one of two things: either last stop Tokyo, because the ship was not used in the Atlantic, or large, slow target. The ship could make 10 knots, which is approximately 11 miles an hour.
Well, so far we've been talking about names. The name of the state of New Jersey, the name of cities, Trenton, Newark, Camden, and even counties. But I want to shift gears now and talk a little bit about shipyards where ships were built in New Jersey, not necessarily named after New Jersey. So we can start here with New York Shipbuilding Corporation in Camden, New Jersey. This is along the Delaware River, right across the river from the huge city of Philadelphia, and they made so many ships. And here's an example, the Jacob Jones, which is a destroyer.
Now, if you notice here, there's no postmark per se. They've been canceled. Stamps have been canceled, but not with the standard U.S. Postal Service or Post Office Department at that time canceled.
It hadn't been routinized.
No. It's passed by the censor, and the censor's initials are up there. But what's interesting about this ship is that she was the only U.S. destroyer to be sunk in World War I.
Okay.
She was torpedoed aft, and the depth charges blew up, took the ship down.
So here is a ship called the Jacob Jones, a destroyer lost in World War I. Let's take a look. Here's the Jacob Jones from World War II. And I understand it, too, was sunk by a German submarine in 1942.
Yep, sunk off of Cape May, New Jersey. Same thing, German submarine. Torpedo hit her in the stern. Ship blew up. Depth charges blew up. Heavy loss of life. But people actually dived down to the wreckage of the ship. She's only 130 feet deep. And if you're an accomplished scuba diver, that's in the realm of, yes, we can get down there and up.
So this was one of the 500 ships built by New York Shipbuilding in Camden. Here's another one, the Reuben James. I understand that was a destroyer that was sunk in 1941.
Yeah, there are several things that are of interest in this cover. First of all, the uniqueness of the postmark. Again, it's different from all the others. And I'm proud to say I did this cachet. I took a computer image and I shrunk it down and I printed it on the envelope. Reuben James was an important ship because she was sunk in October 41 before the United States was ready to go to war. So there was a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of finger-pointing, but we weren't ready to go to war yet. And so nothing went beyond the finger-pointing stage. It's interesting, though, it demonstrated to the American people the need to be ready, the need to start producing.
And it's a four stack, which is very characteristic of that era.
Yes.
Now, so far we've been talking about these photographs of covers that are on the screen here, but I want to shift gears, talk a little bit about the Indianapolis. We have two covers. This is the first one, right?
Yeah.
It's a heavy cruiser.
Correct.
And I understand that what's so interesting about it, it was sunk, July 30th, 1945. The war was almost over. And yet, there's a kind of irony. It had been carrying supplies for the atomic bomb, which had been dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Now the Japanese kind of got even. They sunk the ship.
The ship was on a secret mission to deliver atom bomb components to Tinian Island.
Yeah.
As such, the mission being secret, no one was told where she was going, what route she was taking. And when she arrived, they offloaded the atomic bomb components, and the ship was supposed to go on to the Philippines. But it was a secret mission, and nobody, again, no information. The ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. 900 men went into the water, and only 300 survived the shark attack. This is the ship that is the basis of the movie Jaws.
And there's another cover. It was a kind of a commemorative cover.
Yeah, this is a commemorative cover. This is popular among collectors, and someone produced this commemorative cover showing the ship and the date and a very fancy postmark. Postmark is in the shape of a ship.
So we've been talking about New York shipbuilding in Camden. I want to shift gears here and talk about the federal shipbuilding in Kearny, New Jersey, with reference to the USS Juneau, a light cruiser.
Kearny Yard was just, federal shipbuilding in Kearny is just an absolutely amazing yard. It produced just ships at the rate at one point. 4 ships were launched in the space of less than an hour. And it basically demonstrated to both the Axis powers, to both Germany and Japan, how terribly they underestimated U.S. productive capacity. It just turned out ship after ship after ship. Now, the Juneau was a light cruiser, and she's famous for being destroyed. In 1942, she was torpedoed, and among the crewmen who did not survive were 5 brothers of the Sullivan family. They all perished when the ship went down. It led to the military rule about brothers serving in the same unit so that a family line is not wiped out.
Wow. And another shipbuilding company, New Jersey Shipbuilding, It was located in what is now Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and they did lots and lots of these landing crafts.
Thousands of them. They
Wow.
turned out thousands of landing craft on basically an assembly line basis, to the point that when the ship reached the end of the assembly line, it basically slid into the water. It was just that efficient a yard. It's not there anymore, but
Yeah. And another company was the Electric Launch Company in Bayonne, New Jersey, and they built some 400 patrol torpedo boats, including the famous one, 109. Tell us about the 109.
yeah, Elko Yard, electric launch company. Again, mass production, and PT-109 was lost in the Solomon Islands in 1943. The captain of the ship at that point was a young man named Kennedy. Yes, it's the same Kennedy that was the president of the United States. This was John Kennedy's ship, and he was for his actions after his ship was destroyed and saving his crewmen, he is regarded as a hero.
And then there's another company, Port Newark Dry Dock, and they made destroyer escorts and destroyers, lots and lots. But particularly interesting is the Normandy, later called the Lafayette. Tell us the story here.
SS Normandy was the pride of the French line. It's regarded by many people as perhaps the most beautiful ocean liner then and now. When France was overrun by the Germans, the ship was interned in New York City at the pier, and there were Coast Guard people aboard to make sure there was no sabotage. When the United States entered the war, the ship was seized by the United States government, renamed Lafayette. The idea was she'd become a troop ship, bring over thousands of people. In the process of converting the ship from an ocean liner to a troop transport, a fire got started, went out of control, and the fire department and the fire boats began pumping water into the ship, while the ship's designer was telling them, "You got to count the flood, or she'll roll over." No one paid him much attention, and she rolled over onto her side. And then eventually she was righted, towed across the harbor to New Jersey. And at that point in the war, the material needed to convert her into a troop ship was just not available. At the time to do it was not available, and so she eventually was scrapped in New Jersey.
And interestingly enough, in Port Newark today, if you go to the Seamen's Church Institute, which is right there on the waterfront, in the lobby of the Seamen's Church Institute, there's the bell from the Normandy on full display. So you can actually touch the bell and make the connection with this historic ship. They do valuable work there at the Seamen's Church Institute.
Now that you mentioned the bell, going back to the first DD-61, Reuben James, the first Jacob Jones DD-61, the British located the remains of the submarine, and they went down and they brought up the destroyer's bell. They are in the process now of stabilizing it, and eventually the bell is going to be turned over to the United States Navy. What most people do not realize is that sunken ships are grave sites, and you don't go down and pull things out without permission.